If you've ever smoked a joint with Kirk Tousaw, you might consider him a cannabis historian with the amount of vast knowledge he can lay down on the spot. Yet according to Kirk, it's Chris Bennett who's the actual historian, possessing a vast amount of cannabis knowledge.
All over the world, you could take a look at the world's oldest existing religions: Taoism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Sikhism. These are the major world religions, and all of them have some sort of tie-in with cannabis.
Join the movement as we hear Chris and Kirk's legal battle, as they fought to gain rights to use cannabis based on religious sacrament, and how a Section 1 charter fight is looming ahead in our near future. Sitting here with Chris Bennett and Kirk Tousaw, two legends from the cannabis industry, and I mean that sincerely. Thank you so much.
That just means we're old.
Yeah. I'm feeling it.
Having a sit-down discussion here at the CHE of 2018. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us. Yeah. Fun.
Yeah, I started being a cannabis activist in 1990 out in Ucluelet, and then the issue was the logging of the last old-growth coastal rainforest, the Clayoquot Sound. And when I found out that an acre of hemp could replace 4 acres of trees over the same 20-year period for pulp and paper, it became something really I was impassioned about. I'd grown up, working in mills, and my brother was a logger, and so I really realized there was importance for the economy and work and that type of thing, but there's also an importance for the environment, And that's what got me into it initially. And then I started traveling around, going to colleges and universities with this group I formed, Patriotic Canadians for Hemp. That's how I met Dana in 1990. He had a group for League for Ethical Actions of Drugs at SFU. And I'd go down there and speak and bring a little piece of hemp paper and a little piece of hemp cloth, because you just couldn't even get any of that stuff then, and speak about the wonders of the hemp plant, and then started getting into medical marijuana and seeing the whole thing grow. So when I started, there were no other activists, what I mean? And to see where it is now, within a block of my home here in Vancouver, there's probably half a dozen dispensaries, and billboards on the corner telling you where to find dispensaries.
That's
if you can't
right.
find those,
and your app, you have an app that'll take you there.
Yeah, so it's really come a long way. My personal interest has always been, more related to the spiritual history of cannabis, and I've written a number of books on that. And that's how Kirk and I really did a lot of work on a religious federal challenge. I applied for an exemption for spiritual use, much like the exemption 51s that were first granted for medical use. And Health Canada, of course, as we expected, rejected this, and then that opened it up to a process in federal court, which we went through for a couple of years, culminating in a court case. And, unfortunately, the court case went really nuts. The judge, I think, was very unbalanced, Judge Shore. It started out with him wanting everybody to do calisthenics in the courtroom and warming it up, to, at the end of the case, calling me in 10 minutes with my lawyer and Health Canada's lawyers before the case, asking me to drop the case because he was planning on giving a negative response to it, and I don't think he felt that great about it. And we presented a very good case. I had expert testimony from affidavits from a number of professors who were familiar with my work in history. And Health Canada didn't really bring much to the table. Their argument was basically that public safety was the concern, because then other people would start saying they used it for their religion as well, and that would open it up. And so they're assuming, for one thing, that people are liars. And their public safety argument, they've thrown it out the window now with a regulated market coming in. So obviously that wasn't that much of an argument because it is safe enough for public use, And we could have gone back to it. We waited a couple of years, but with legalization coming around the corner, I wasn't really impassioned enough to put that sort of effort back into a fight for something that was going to be legalized anyways. What was I going to ask for a little bit more than what other people had, that type of thing. It didn't really seem like something I wanted to put a lot of time, energy, and money into at that point.
The fears that people are showing, there's so many people that were in the audience today for that last talk that are really scared. Like I see it. I had one woman come up to me, she's shaking, right? And she's frustrated and angry, and I'm feeling a little more optimistic. I don't think that people are just going to be closed off of, their medicine, what they need. Do you see the transition going to, is it going to be painless for people?
I think if there was a regulatory market in place, it might be a real good transition, but there isn't anything in place. And so, there's this big, not just a gray area, but a gray timeline of when that's going to be and when those shops can open up and who's going to get the licenses. So I think that they've kind of set themselves up to fail with that clean break from the black market into the legal market like they're planning. I don't really see it happening the way that they've got planned, but who knows?
I mean, I think legalization means a couple of different things in a couple of different areas, right? There's what legalization means to the consumer, to the person who just wants to have access to cannabis and not be a criminal for consuming it or possessing it. Those people will feel immediate benefits from legalization because there will no longer be a criminal offense to possess certain quantities of it, and you'll be able to grow certain quantities of it, and so that produces an immediate consumer benefit. I differentiate consumer in that context from patients because one of the ripple effects of the other side of legalization, which is about the marketplace, which is about the commercial aspects of actually producing this plant and its associated products at enough scale to get into the stores of shelves on stores to satisfy the incredible demand for cannabis products that exist in this country in a legal way. That process takes time, and nobody's ready for that. I mean, nobody's ready for that. Nobody at any stage of the process is ready for doing that in the legal regulated environment. It's going to take some time. So I think we're going to see like an immediate benefit to what I'd call recreational consumers, understanding that their use may also be viewed through the lens of therapeutic use. I prefer to leave that distinction to the person exercising their own autonomy than to force my labels on them. But they will have an immediate legalization benefit. Industry and particularly small industry is going to lag behind that, and patients that are going to be the unfortunate and really tragic people that have been left out of a lot of this legalization framework. Some will find their access to the products that they've found benefit from interrupted, and that's going to be a real problem. I don't know that it's a problem that could possibly be avoidable, absent, as we heard today in the panel with a representative from the provincial government, government moves at a glacially slow pace. And they consider this transition to legalization, which has been underway for about 2.5 years, to be fast. That tells you everything you sort of need to know about that time scale. So there's challenges. There's a lot of challenges.
Perhaps this is some place that Move the Movement, our organization, can come in and help in that regard. And Chris, I don't know if you know Move the Movement, nonprofit
Just heard about it recently, sounds great.
Yes, so we've started a platform which we're trying to empower people to step forward, tell their story with cannabis. Kirk was one of them. He did a video story, went online, and we've looked to industry leaders since then to tell their story as well. And we're trying to drive people to the site and fill out their story in written form and build the tremendous amount of anecdotal evidence that is sitting out there, just sitting there, and bring it.
Lived experiences.
Yeah. Lived experiences. And I mean, for sure, this is going to become a living database that we can actually pull from. But at the same time, it works on a deeper level. We can actually empower people to step forward and break the fucking stigma that has been holding people back. We see it, cannabis as being a vehicle that if we can affect that type of change in this area, then it's going to open the floodgates where we can affect change in all areas.
Yeah, I think that's one of the major benefits of legalization is a lot more people are going to consume cannabis. Yeah. And they're going to, cannabis is a catalyst for potential medical benefit. It's a catalyst for euphoria, recreational benefits, of catalyst for spiritual benefit, which is something I learned from Chris in the context of the case that we brought forward. Chris's own experience with having an epiphany from cannabis and realizing sort of his individual spiritual and religious path led him in a direction to believe the things that he believes about cannabis being the tree of life, and then to go through and then back all that up with now 4 books of incredibly detailed wonderful research on cannabis's role in religion and spirituality and magic and all these sort of other human endeavors led us to say, okay, well, look, there was this medical system in place that you could fill out a form, and if a doctor said that you had a medical condition, you could get the right to possess cannabis and grow it for yourself. That was the paradigm we were operating in when we brought the spiritual use challenge. And the sort of idea was, we have an individual who qualifies as a sincere believer in the spiritual power of cannabis. And the prevailing case law then and now is that religious belief, spiritual belief, is a highly individualized inquiry. And the role of the court is not to pass judgment on whether your beliefs sync up with dogma or any accepted religious practices, but rather to pass judgment on whether you sincerely believe those things. Right? And at the point that you sincerely believe those things, if the government restricts you from engaging in that practice, it violates Section 2 of the Charter. Now, it may be able to do so by satisfying the test in Section 1, which says rights can be overridden if there's a sufficiently compelling government objective. And there's a legalistic test that you can go through to figure that out. We never got there. The judge said it's not, he found that it wasn't religious use, essentially because it did not comport with his characterization of existing dogma. We thought the law was wrong at the trial court decision. We thought there were other aspects of the case that were peculiar. And so we brought an appeal to the Federal Court of Appeal. And the judge who had decided the case, in effect, took the written submission of the Crown, Health Canada's lawyers acting on behalf of the Government of Canada, took the written submission that they made in the constitutional argument, changed a few paragraphs, and that was his decision. And so we argued first that he had gotten it wrong on the interpretation of Section 2 of the Charter, because we believed that he had. But secondly, that he had, in effect, abdicated the judicial function by not applying his independent judgment to the case and the facts and coming to his own decision. He had instead simply incorporated what the Crown said. And he had done it before in the context of other cases and been admonished by the Federal Court of Appeal for doing so. Fortunately, we won. Unfortunately, we won on the easier ground for the Court of Appeal to overturn it on, which was, yeah, he shouldn't have done that. It didn't give you the appearance of having a fair and impartial hearing of your very serious constitutional issues, and so we're going to send it back down.
So may I ask, what year was that?
Well, geez, you're going to betray our age and memory now.
I think like 2010 we started the
That's
case.
the gotcha question. Yeah, 2010, 2012.
Yeah.
I turned off then because
2013.
that's when I did my stupid thing, backpack, weed across the border, serve time, and I knew, and that's where your name stood out because I was paying attention to what was going across, and that's where it really came to the forefront for me.
In the case, the judge had brought, the Health Canada brought up a judge's decision from an earlier case I was involved in as an expert witness in the late Ian Hunter's case. And the judge in that case, he said he accepted that the defendant was sincere about his belief. He accepted that there was a historical role for cannabis as a religious sacrament, but he couldn't allow it to go further because to do so would open it up to thugis who ritually murder people and cannibals who ritually eat people to practice their religion, which is a moot point because cannabis use is a victimless crime, and in order to eat people or ritually murder them, you have to infringe on somebody else's charter rights, where that's not happening in this. But that was their actual argument, part of their actual Health Canada's actual argument. So apparently, under this new legal regime, they're okay with cannibalism and okay with ritual murder because now they've come around.
They've come around on cannabis. That's right.
So
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, and that sort of reduction, that sort of two types of argumentation, right? It's the slippery slope argument on their side, and we can reduce it to the absurd because it's obviously and patently absurd. And frankly, the answer in Section 1 is, in the case of these other things that create demonstrable harm to others, Section 1 would in fact allow you to infringe their Section 2 charter rights. Their charter rights may still be violated in the sense that you may have a protected right to believe that way and practice that way, but that right runs into, hey, I think the government has an overwhelming and substantial pressing objective in not letting you sort of kill people and eat them. Yes. So there is a legal answer to that, right? That doesn't have to involve stopping the analysis before you get to the hard part for the government. And that's, Section 1 is the hard part for the government. Once you've demonstrated a violation of a constitutional right, the burden of proof and persuasion shifts to the government to demonstrate why it would be compelling, substantially compelling to override that right. So I think we're going to actually see that play out again in the context of marketing restrictions on cannabis, because it's clearly a violation of Section 2 of the Charter, the free expression rights, commercial speech rights protected by Section 2, just like it was a violation of Section 2 to restrict tobacco marketing. And in that case, in the Supreme Court of Canada, the court said, yes, absolutely, this is a violation of Section 2 of the Charter. But in the case of tobacco, the government has a substantial pressing objective that it's meeting in the most minimally intrusive way possible, based on the evidence at the time. I don't think they can come up with the evidence on cannabis that sort of turns it into something so dangerous that you can sustain treating it in this restrictive way. And so we'll see a Section 1 battle, I think, within the next few years on that issue.
Yeah, I'd be surprised too if under the current regime, if they're shutting down dispensaries, if some people don't make a conversion into a church or something like that. I've already heard some talk about that. I believe Ted Smith's been considering it on the island. And so we'll have to see how that plays out. And if the people are sincere, I'd be more than happy to be an expert witness and set them up with other expert witnesses, professors, and things like that.
That's the nail on the head there, though. The sincerity is both the legal test and, frankly, it's the moral test.
I don't want to be involved if people aren't sincere.
There's too much depth of spirituality with cannabis to trivialize it with some insincerity.
I've been using cannabis consistently for 25 years. And I would say that I consider myself a spiritual person, and it's part of my spiritual journey. And if it meant for me to be able to possess it, grow it, do whatever I wanted with it, I'll become part of the church for sure.
Yeah, well, for sure. All over the world, you could take a look at the world's oldest existing religions: Taoism, Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Sikhism. These are the major world religions, and all of them have some sort of tie-in with cannabis, in my opinion, and in some of them more documentable than in others, but definitely some sort of tie-in.
I wanted to ask you about that. Judaism.
Yeah, well, there's like this Jewish anthropologist and etymologist, Sula Bennett, that was working out of Poland, and in 1936 she wrote an essay, Early Diffusions and Folk Uses of Hemp. And in that essay, she took a look at the Hebrew word cannabosum and then showed how this was related to the later term for cannabis in Hebrew, cannabis, and traced it back and showed that this was the same plant. And this occurs a number of times in the Old Testament text, or the Torah, the initial one in Exodus 30:23, where God, who first speaks to Moses from flames and a fire within a burning bush, commands him to make this holy anointing oil with about 1.5 pounds of this cannabosum mixed with myrrh and cinnamon into about 1.5 gallons of olive oil. And every time that Moses is to speak to the Lord, he goes into this enclosed tent-like setting, the tent of the meeting, and he places some of this oil on the altar of incense and rubs it on his body, and then he speaks to the Lord in the pillar of smoke over the altar of incense. So if the cannabosum holy anointing oil is not burning in the temple, then the Lord's nowhere to be seen or heard. And I think when you throw cannabis into that scenario, it becomes like a shamanic type of scene where somebody, a witch doctor or a shaman in South America or Africa partakes of a psychoactive plant and interprets that as some sort of religious revelation. In the case of cannabis, and other psychoactive substances, I think that is, it's not just chemicals affecting the brain, although it is chemicals affecting the brain and receptor sites and that type of stuff. There's an aspect of something happening that's a little deeper than that, and it has to do with things like the memory of the species, soul of the species, instinct, and forces like that, and that's what they're kind of tapping into, and that's where this deeper kind of wealth and knowledge associated with spiritual cannabis use comes from, and that's why we see in India today sadhus, sitting down with ganja before they do their yogic asanas in an effort to bind with Shiva, or Nihang Sikhs partaking of Sukadun in complicated rituals in order to get in contact with the one God for them as well, and in Tibetan Buddhism, and where it's used in rites there, or in Zoroastrianism, which I'll be talking about shortly here on stage, that all of these guys are tapping.
It's 420. That started just now.
How about the Rastafarians?
Rastafarians are the most obvious, you know, like
Bob Marley's my favorite
Yeah, no,
revolutionary.
for sure. You know, Rastafarians are the most obvious, but it's relatively a new religion. You know, it's kind of like a symbiosis of what happened with black slaves that were taught the Bible, coming into contact with transient Indian migrant workers, and picking up on things like ganja, and these things fusing, and there'd be some sort of like natural recognition that there was something to do with the Bible, you know what I mean? Some sort of intuitive grasping of that took place, and it all fit, but you know, it fit for a reason. But that's why you see the dreadlocks in Rastafarianism, and the use of chillums in terms like Cali weed. All this comes from India.
Wow, I didn't know that. Thank you very much. I was told that you have the wealth of knowledge.
There ain't a guy on the planet that knows more about the role
So we
of
just met
cannabis
this
and
man,
religion
Chris
than
Bennett, and I
Bennett.
was hoping to find him over the course of the weekend and do a sit down with him. So the way that this happened was just like beautiful. We were coming through, and this lovely lady over here was following you, and we got this sit down. And from what I've come to know, Chris Bennett, we've classified Kirk as a legend. We do it with very few, but you are Kirk. You've done a lot for this industry, and same with you, Chris.
Thanks.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
it's been my great pleasure being part of the cannabis
Yeah.
movement. You know, and seeing it
Me
grow.
too, brother.
It's been a lot of fun. You know?
got that right.
I
Well,
didn't go to
you
jail like a lot of my
you-
friends, and suffer like I've seen, like a lot of people. You know, and it's given me a lot of opportunity, and it's taught me a lot. And it's been also the journey on my own spiritual awakening.
Yeah,
For sure, brother, for sure.
you carry it well. Thank you very much. So much.